Joining me now is Dr. Paul Offit, one of the country's top vaccine experts, who is also with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Offit, thank you so much for joining us today. Lots of great news out there with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine now coming in as confirmed through a preprint that they will also be able to hold up against the Delta variant. So that gives us all the vaccines approved in the U.S. That say as much. What does this mean long term for the rest of the summer and into fall?
I think it's very reassuring. People were concerned that a single dose of the J&J vaccine might not have been as good as 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine in protecting against these variants of concern. But when J&J did its phase 3 trial, its efficacy trial, they did it not only in the United States, they also did it in Brazil, where the Brazilian variant was common. They did it in South Africa, where the South African variant was common. And that vaccine performed very well at preventing severe critical disease. Now they have a study showing that the antibody response that they induce against the Delta variant is even better than they saw against the Brazilian or South African variants, and therefore predict, I think correctly, that they're going to have excellent protection against severe critical disease caused by the Delta variant.
And this Delta variant is concerning, of course, because it's increasingly transmissible, but there are also some questions about, is it more deadly? What are the real concerns about it? There's a report out that in the UK, some individuals who've been vaccinated have died recently. So can you put it all together for us? What do we need to be focused on here?
Well, so this bat coronavirus that started in Wuhan and then left China, the virus that left China was the first variant. It didn't have a Greek letter name. It was just called D614G, but that was a more contagious strain. Swept across Asia, swept across the United States, swept across Europe, and caused millions of people to die. That was been largely replaced now by the second variant, the so-called UK or Alpha variant, which is more contagious. Now we have the third variant, which is even more contagious, the so-called Delta variant. It's not clear to me that it's more virulent, meaning more likely to kill you. But it clearly is more contagious. Therefore, you're more likely to be infected. Therefore, you're more likely to die just because it's more contagious. But it's never really to the virus's advantage to kill you. It's because then it doesn't get to reproduce itself anymore. I mean, the perfect virus is the common cold virus, which just spreads from one person to the next, but doesn't kill the person it infects. So I think where this matters is that when you see a more contagious strain, what that means is that you have to have an even greater percentage of the population that's vaccinated to stop spread. So I think that has to happen. And we're not even close yet. We pat ourselves on the back for having roughly 50% protection with vaccine, at least fully vaccinated. I think we have to get to at least 80% protection, and we're not close to that. And what worries me is that we head into late fall, early winter. This is a winter virus. And when kids are going to go back to school, they're not likely to be masking. They're not likely to be social distancing. And I think you're going to see, again, an outbreak of this virus come late fall, early winter, unless we get a much higher percentage of the population vaccinated.
I want to get to kids in a second, but let's look at the booster in the fall. What are your thoughts on the boosters and whether or not we'll need them this fall, or is this a conversation more for next year?
So we'll see. You probably should never make any predictions about this virus because you're always wrong, but I'll try anyway. There was a study done recently in the journal Nature that looked at the bone marrows of people who were either naturally infected or vaccinated and found that there were fairly high frequencies of so-called memory plasma cells. Plasma cells are the cells that excrete antibodies, and that was fairly long-lived. I think that presages or predicts likely fairly long-term immunity, where you really wouldn't need yearly boosters, but rather may need boosters every 3 to 5 years, if then. So we'll learn as we go. The CDC is certainly looking at this. We'll see, but I'm optimistic we may not need yearly boosters here.
All right. Well, let's go back to kids for a second, because obviously in the fall, that's a concern. I know that early on there was, really just a general understanding that the ACE2 receptor, that is what the virus binds to, is less prevalent in children. So either they were going to not be affected as much, or if they did, it would be mild. That seems to have largely held up, but it still is a concern, and we should be thinking about that. So going into the fall, we're not sure when these kids will be approved for vaccines. How do we handle this potential, threat of a surge?
Right. I think so. We have a vaccine for children over 12 years of age. We're in the process of doing trials for the 6 to 12-year-old child, as well as the 2-year-old to 6-year-old child, and we'll see. I mean, hopefully we'll have those studies fully recruited by at least certainly by the end of the year, hopefully before that. It's a problem. Obviously, when the virus came into this country, it primarily affected those who were older. 93% of the deaths were in people over 55 years of age. And the mantra at the time was children get infected less frequently and less severely. That's true, but it's not like they don't get infected at all. There's still at least 4 million children who've been tested and found to be infected, assuming the number is going to be much higher than that. There's been at least 40,000 hospitalizations in children. There's been at least 300 deaths in children. There was recently a paper published in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report by the CDC looking at 200 adolescents who were admitted to the hospital, a third of whom were previously healthy. And what they found was a third of that total group had to go to the intensive care unit, 5% had to be mechanically ventilated. So children can suffer, can be hospitalized, and can die from this virus. Therefore, children need to be protected. Plus, from a population standpoint, children represent 20% of the population. And if we're going to get to population or herd immunity here, I think we need to vaccinate children for that reason as well. But come winter, I think we may not have a vaccine in hand, and children are unlikely to be masked or social distance. I think the recommendation should be come winter, the children should do what they did last winter and mask and social distance to the degree possible.
We'll have to leave it there. But Dr. Paul Offit, thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure.